My topic for now is how to go through misery with dignity, how we suffer consciously and well. And one reason I bring this up, I think it is one of the most important things that we teach in Lurianic spiritual psychology, the specific spiritual psychology that I teach, that I think we all know, and for many of you, that's one of the reasons you are at Or HaTorah. The way we understand the human condition, the way we understand the divine, at one time is very mystical, and at the other time very humanistic. So I don't want to share a few aspects of that and then move forward. So one reason that I stand against most traditional theology is that most traditional theology has the idea that there is an omniscient, all-powerful, all-present, benevolent divine mind that runs everything, and whatever happens is a product of this divine mind. That's the problem of so-called omnipotence, the full power of God. I don't believe it. I've never believed it. I remember when I was a kid in Hebrew school, people talked that way. I thought to myself, well, I don't believe it. I don't know if even the rabbi believes it. I mean, my first rabbi at the Compton Jewish Community Center was a refugee from Germany. I mean, he grew up under the Nazis. I couldn't believe that he thought that the Nazis were God's will. I couldn't imagine that. He thought all his family that had been slaughtered both in Germany and in Poland, that this was God's will. I never believed it. I never accepted it. And I remember the first time that I was introduced to Kabbalistic and Hasidic thought with the idea that while there is an infinite divine mind, as the divine mind extends into the created universe, there's a breaking of the vessels. The details I've taught about, and I will teach about again. But in essence, the benevolence of the divine, the light of the divine goes through shattered vessels and can't make it into this realm. The light is hidden in forms that we call klipot, that we call husks. These husks are scattered through the universe and scattered within us. Evil comes from these klipot. We look at the evil in the world. Almost all evil has some ideology. Aside from common criminals, when you look at the great evils in the world, there's something pushing it. It's nationalism, it's religion, it's power, it's hatred. There's some idea. So holy ideas get encased in klipot, and they produce great evil. Now, it's the same thing with human beings. Much of our misery can be understood as divine impulses covered in klipot. So one of the ways that we understand breaking through our misery, our sadness, our depression, our grief, is try to find the divine spark within the klipa. Now, last night I cited at length Psalm 139. I won't do that again today, but I really recommend to all of you to go to Psalm 139 and study it carefully. I'll just summarize it a bit here because it's a wonderful articulation, a biblical articulation, an expansion of the idea of the light encased within the husk. So Psalm 139 talks about the human being, the human condition. We are woven by the mind of God. We are shaped by the mind of God. And the psalmist says, if I were to ascend to the heavens, you are there. And when I go into the deep bowels of the universe, the darkest place, you light it up. Because the divine light has woven us. And we are, as it were, extensions of divine creative power. I shared an experience that I've had, that many of you have had, that the psalmist talks about. The more that one goes into the intricacies of the inner life and sees the woven divine presence, the more miraculous it feels, especially in moments of resilience, especially in moments when we work through suffering. For example, we know that grief is only tied to love. And therefore, within the husk of unendurable grief is a love that is greater than the limitations of human life. We lose, but we still love. And the love hurts because we don't have that physical presence. We don't have that person we can talk to. But if we go deep within, the woven texture of the inner life, the hand of God weaving us and consistently weaving us, We experience the power of the love that is more than the power of the grief. And so in whatever misery we find ourselves, when we identify with the misery, when we say, well, this is life, that's when the misery gets worse. The people I've seen stuck in toxic relationships, this is a part of the wisdom work I teach over and over again. I ask people, what's the misery? What's the misery? Oftentimes, I want my spouse, my child, my parent to change. My misery is they are not the person of which I approve. Now, when we get it to that raw version, they deny. They deny. They say, no, 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 I accept them as they are. And I say, time for truth. Time for truth. You're disappointed. You're frustrated. You wish they were different. And your happiness, your well-being is mortgaged to their state. And it might be a state that is not whole and fulfilled. And you're, in a sense, a mirror reflection of where they're stuck at. And I know it sounds trite, but it's true. You can only change yourself, but it's deeper than that. Because when we are able, and I'm going to take us on a bit of a journey I took us on last night and then walk us back. When we are able to be virtuous in character, not treat people as if they are dissatisfied, that they are unfulfilled projects of our life. That's why we criticize, complain, condemn, have conflict, because they're not doing, thinking, or being what we want them to be, as if we are the gold standard. We start to defend ourselves because we want another person's approval so deeply. Well, maybe they're not in a state of mind where they can offer that approval. Is that what we're going to do? We're going to feel so severely less than what we are because at a given moment, we're not getting someone else's approval. Or in those tough moments, can we take a breath, root ourselves in the fact that we are woven divine light within us, miracles beyond our understanding, an awesomeness that we only understand in moments of great mysticism. Once we root ourselves in that, another person's upset with us, we say to ourselves, so be upset. That's where you are in your journey. Can't talk you out of it. When you calm down, I'm happy to talk to you. And when one roots oneself in the knowledge of the soul, the virtue practice that I teach, that many people are white knuckling, don't criticize, don't complain, don't condemn, don't get defensive. They white knuckle it. And one reason I recommend virtue before the deeper parts of transformation is that you don't know what you're fighting until you fight the urges to be defensive or lash out at another. The very simplest level. It's the very simplest beginning. Whatever's going on inside of me, lashing out in anger, holding my ground in defensiveness is not going to make it better. That we know. You take a breath. I'd like another person to change, but I'm not in charge of it. I'd like this person to calm down. I've gone 3 times. I can't do anymore. So I have to wait for them to calm down. That's the beginning of wisdom. Because you've tapped into the sadness of the moment, having a bad moment with another person, the sadness that people don't live by your program, maybe they shouldn't, the sadness that they're having a bad moment or that you're having a bad moment. It's just sad. You don't need to get angry. You don't need to get defensive. And you start to calm into the first step for me is rationality in thinking. What are my needs? What are my expectations? To what am I truly entitled? What are my demands? What exactly is happening here right now? Where are we in the course of things? So when we identify with our misery, our fear and anxiety, our disappointment, our attempt to control, our desire for freedom, we become that. When we go down and we can actually separate ourselves from the drama of the unconscious ego self and ascend into the world of spirit or descend into the life of soul, our misery lessens greatly. Our misery lessens greatly because we've discovered yet again our purpose in life. Maximize light, maximize goodness. Wherever you are, you get into a tough moment, You take a breath, you calm down, say, well, what's my life about right now? My life right now is about maximizing light, maximize my goodness. That's the purpose. That's the what. We never forget the what. Even when I don't believe in anything, I believe in that. My only question now is the how. Don't question the what. The purpose is to maximize light and goodness. The how is our continuous question. How do I maximize light in a destructive relationship? How do I maximize light when I find myself falling into old patterns? How do I maximize light when I find myself beset by grief and anxiety and despair? Well, your purpose is to maximize light. Now you're after skills. And this is where, when I teach Roberto Salgioli, from whom I've taken the ideas of the strong will, the force, the dynamo that often gives out, move into the skillful will, which is most of my teaching. But then I remind myself that a skillful will, not harnessed to a good will, of course, can create destructive things. So you have to be rooted in the good will. So goodness has to be nurtured. Our connection to goodness has to be nurtured. If you identify with your misery, you can't cultivate the will to good. You can't connect to the good. So beyond the strong will and the skillful will is the good will. And here, Roberto Salgioli, who wrote the book, The Act of Will, which is one of the 3 or 4 most important books I've read in my life. I'll be teaching courses on them again. He's very identified with the humanistic tradition, with Erich Fromm and Abraham Maslow, where they didn't want, although they were Freudians in spirit, in the sense that the unconscious does in many ways control our lives much more than the conscious mind. But the unconscious is simply not the drama between the urges of the id, the repressions of the superego, and the ego getting squashed in between. Because the core question, of course, is who's watching that? Who's managing that? And why is the health of the ego of value? Where did that value come from? Notice that even mechanistic Freudian psychological theory is rooted in value. And the value is the goodness of human life and our obligation to bring as much goodness as possible. One thing the humanists did is said, let's stop talking about the struggle between the repressive superego and the urges of the it, of the so-called the it. It's just called the das Es, the it in German. Let's ask ourselves what we're aiming for. What's the goal of all of this? And who's supervising it? What do you call the consciousness that decides to work with urges, habits of the unconscious ego self that only are destructive, including what I call one of the urges of the unconscious ego self, which is to repress. So I don't see the healthy ego here and the repressive urges above it. I think it's just one of the urges of the unconscious ego self to make us feel guilty, to repress, to get confused. It's all part of the unconscious ego self. So my question has been, who's regulating this? Who is that mysterious I? And you'll see this also in Psalm 139, I believe it's verse 15 or 16, that atzmi, that the etzem, the essence, the Hebrew word for self, atzmi, meaning my essence. The Hebrew word essence is bone, and etzem is a bone, but it's also the self. Isn't that incredible? That the Hebrew word for essence is connected to the word for bone, like the frame of your being. Some translators, when they see this word etzem or atzmi, they call it the frame of our being. I guess I'll call it the framed essence of our being. Well, it's there. We each have a framed essence of our being that is connected to the soul and to the spirit. It's on its journey. And what happens to us? We get locked into our misery. And try to imagine the frame of our essence in the height of spirit and the depths of soul is just alienated from us. In a way, if it could speak, it would say, what are you doing? Wallowing in your misery, in your anger, your defensiveness, your anxiety, your fear. You've lost a sense of your purpose. Your purpose is not to identify with your misery, although the misery is real. Your purpose is to identify with your spiritual essence, which is woven by the divine, and whose purpose is to maximize divine light. Now, let me just bring this down to a particular I mentioned last night. It's a personal story I've mentioned, and I found just this week an echo in another person. The greatest physical pain I've been in my life was I had a bad herniated disc back in November of 08. Some of you at Oratory remember the rabbi was arriving on crutches to services. When you have a herniated disc, the disc herniates and impinges right onto the spine. People who have had that know there's no greater pain than something impacting right onto the spine. You're out of your mind in pain. Nothing can make you better. I, I assume there's some drug that can make me better. I don't want to take it. And my wife and children remember I'm in a downstairs bathroom with a cloth in my mouth, chewing on it, and so my screams wouldn't wake up the neighbors. That's true. I was in that much pain. And in that pain, I had a kind of a glorious revelation. I'm not the pain. The pain is happening to me. I'm greater than the pain. There's a self left over that's above the pain. And I watched myself in the pain, and here's the thought that I had. Wow, I had no idea, oh my body, that you are that strong, capable of creating such pain. I'm in awe of you. I had no idea you had that much power to create this much pain, but I'm more than the pain. You can bring the pain on because I'm greater than the pain. And I remember in the midst of this misery, and I could witness my body in excruciating pain, but I had gone to a safe place. This strange experience that my consciousness is greater than the pain. Now, that made me able to manage pain. And if you ever go to a pain management clinic, that's one thing they will tell you. Don't get yourself addicted to drugs. Be able to rise above the pain and manage the pain, I'm going to say, spiritually, by exerting spirit, managing consciousness, managing your neural pathways from a point of consciousness so the mind can change the brain. Probably one of the most important things we know about the 7 branches of wisdom that Proverbs 9:1 talks about. One of the most important branches of wisdom is the mind can change the brain. So I've been telling this story forever as a way to inspire people. You're not your pain. You're greater than your pain. You're greater than your misery. So just this week, as I'm leaving my studio, I had a new person join, and he wanted to know, hey, what's your story? How'd you stay in for 24 years? He said, you must be a machine. I said, I'm not a machine. I said, I have a herniated disc, 2 busted up shoulders, heart disease, a triple bypass. I said, I'm not a machine. I'm very frail, actually. He says, wow, you had a herniated disc. He says, so did I. So we got in the corner and talked about, it's off the charts. So we talked about, he says, but I don't want to stop me from enjoying jujitsu. He just moved into our neighborhood and found our club. And I said, that's it. So for me, the passion for my art form, jujitsu means the gentle art, believe it or not. The passion for my art was greater than my pain. My passion for my art was greater than my considerable disabilities. And people say, how'd you stay for 24 years? Because I'm passionate about my art and it's greater than my disabilities. That's to put it in a nutshell. So I met somebody who had a similar story, and I want to share this story with you. Many people suffer in relationships, suffer within unnecessarily. This is how M. Scott Peck begins his book, The Road Less Traveled. Life is difficult. And then he makes a claim that I remember when I read the book, I think it was published back in the early 80s, that I thought was outrageous. Most neurosis comes from the inability to suffer well. I thought, well, that can't be, because neuroses come from the unconscious and they're involuntary. They just happen to us. And the more I thought about people who, for example, develop neurotic behavior, is a displacement of something they can't control. And what they can't control is their spouse or children or life or their own emotions. So they displace that on something else that they can control. Now try to imagine the only thing you need to control ultimately is that woven essence to be a vessel of divine light. You don't need to control the spouse, the kids, the parents, or the people around you. Ultimately, you want to. 3rd level out. But who are we to control anything if we are people who over-identify with our misery? Why should you control anything? Try to imagine. You are actually rooted in the woven light. You've come to consciousness. You're a person of good character. You can regulate within. You can think well. I think you now have the warrant to be in control a little bit of other things. But notice, you won't exert control by criticizing, complaining, or being defensive. You will actually exert yourself with great, careful, compassionate wisdom. In any time that I try to exert my will, I realize to myself, it has to be rooted in compassion. It has to be rooted in wisdom. It has to be rooted in a self that's connected to something far beyond me. Saljuli calls this the transpersonal will. It's not about me. It's about something greater than me. Let's walk it back the other way. Let's say you are rooted in the transpersonal self, the self that is not all about you. You might say, you can use the word God, you can use something else if you want, but I like the idea that my inner life is woven by God, is woven in light, it's been, as it were, gifted into me. The pure soul's been gifted into me. I'll start there. From that comes the will to the good. From that comes the skills to exert the good and the strength to see it through. What Saljoli points out is many people do in the opposite order. First, they try strength until they break themselves or break somebody else. Then they realize, okay, maybe I should get some skills. And they spend their whole life just never mastering what he calls the 15 psychological laws of the 15 laws of the 15 psychological laws of the skillful will. I'll teach it again this summer. And they never really master them. They never connect with the essence of their goodwill, sometimes never connecting with the transpersonal will. And so I want to remind everybody, as we transition to Ora Torah, a center for wisdom, that the whole point of wisdom work is to calm down the inner life, to use our strength of will for the good, to master the considerable skills that we need for character and for virtue, so that we can be channels of the transpersonal will, which means a will and a consciousness that comes from beyond us, but channels through us. This is very much a moment for me and Mirav. I mean, there's what we've been going through takes 3 full-time jobs. We can't believe Mirav got it done in 3 or 4 months. I did whatever I could. Why? Because we had the will to do that which is our duty to do. We have a duty. We have to be somewhere. We have to do something. And therefore, we have to produce, we feel called beyond something beyond us to do this. Duty to the Jewish people, duty to our family, duty to the state of Israel, duty to Western civilization, and I mean it, which is rooted in our duty to God. This is our duty. This is our calling at this moment in our lives. This is how we understand ourselves. And that's why we know that so many of you are behind us. So this transpersonal moment of calling calls upon us to do as much good as possible when, continuously in our lives now and when we get there. And therefore, it will take considerable skills and great strength and resilience. So for us, the teachings that we live by are the teachings that guide and inspire us at this very moment in our lives. And again, I need to say, all these ideas have been incubated in this wonderful religious cultural institution called Or HaTorah. And, when I tell my colleagues, they say, what do you talk about? I said, I figure things out in my inner life. I report out to my congregation. They critique, ask questions. I come the next week, I try it again. I said, I don't have sermons. I have inchoate teachings. They said, your board lets you get away with it. I said, my board loves it. What are you talking about? This is what we do. This is what we're supposed to do, is be real. Really work it out in the presence of other people and let them say, hey, well, what about this? What about that? Go home, think about it, do it again, do it again, do it again. That's how this wisdom works came into shape, was our being in conversation with so many of you. Well, that's how it's going to continue. So we never lose our debt of gratitude to all of you who have supported this and got to this point. Um, you, um, our work with your support has brought relief to untold numbers of people, and I mean that really. From the emails I get around the world when I'm on one podcast or another, people said, I listened to the podcast and you changed my life. I said, well, thank you. But I did with the support of a community. So thank you. I'm passing the thanks on to you. And again, we rely on and trust your support as we start all over again for this new endeavor, Or HaTorah, a Center for Wisdom. We want to maximize the light.